So our text this morning comes from the final chapter in the book of Deuteronomy that is also the final chapter in the life of Moses. So reading chapter 34 of Deuteronomy. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho, and the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, all the Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. The Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the Lord's command. He was buried in a valley in the land of Moab opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His sight was unimpaired and his vigor had not abated. The Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the period of mourning for Moses was ended. Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him, and the Israelites obeyed him, doing as the Lord commanded Moses. Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. He was unequal for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt, against Pharaoh and all his servants and his entire land, and for all the mighty deeds and all the terrifying displays of power that Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. So have you been to the top of Mount Pisgah? I'm wondering how many people have been. Have climbed to the top of Mount Pisgah, right, just outside of Springfield. I got a text just a little bit ago from Greg Ibarra. He was so inspired after the first service that he went up and climbed on top of the Mount Pisgah. So I got a picture of him. Had I time, I would have put it up on the screen. I do have a picture of Mount Pisgah, but not the one Greg just sent me. And of course, from the top of Mount Pisgah, you get a beautiful view of the southern Willamette Valley from the coastal range to the Cascades. And I believe, I'm not entirely sure, but I think that it was Elijah Bristow, the first settler, white settler of this area, who, by the way, was a member of the Christian church and the grandfather of one of the founders of this congregation, who named it Pisgah because it reminded him of that place where Moses saw the promised land, right? So the biblical Pisgah is not much higher, about 1,000 feet higher than our Mount Pisgah, probably more of a hill than a mountain by our standards. And it's located just a few miles northeast of where the Jordan River enters the Dead Sea, so in modern-day Jordan. And from there, you can see a good part of the Promised Land, from the hills surrounding northern Galilee on down to the Negev desert in the south. And so this is the view that Moses had. I'm sure God pointed out, there you can almost see Jerusalem, kind of thing. And the account here of his death reads like an obituary. We're told the age of Moses. We're told, given a brief summary of his life. His eyesight had not abated. His vigor, was still, right, 120 years old. Well, maybe. And we are given not his descendants, but his successor, Joshua, the one who will lead the Hebrew people in the Promised Land. So how many of you read the obituaries? Take note of the age of the people, of those who raise their hands. Why is it that just older people read obituaries, right? Oh, there you go. All right. I had one person who said, well, I read it just to make sure that I'm not in it, right? And you know the story of Alfred Nobel, of course, who did read his own obituary in the paper. Someone with the name of Nobel had died, and the paper mistook him for the famed Alfred Nobel, the inventor of dynamite, and so printed his obituary. He was horrified to realize how he would be remembered. And so it was, of course, because of that he gave away his wealth to create the Nobel Prize in medicine, science, literature, and peace. It would be a mistake, however, to read this final chapter on Moses' life just as an obituary, because it's much more than that. The Exodus story, of which Moses is the champion, is not only a story of God's power and faithfulness, it is also a story of human weakness and faithlessness. The people complain, right, after being set free about the food that they're provided. They complain about the toughness of the journey. They rebel against Moses and even God. They lose the trust that they have in their leaders. And even Moses shows his humanity. He fails at one point to give credit to God for the water that comes out of the rock at Meribah, and so we are told he also will be prohibited from entering into the promised land. And it may seem kind of trivial to us for such a little reason, but faithfulness to God is a central theme of the Torah. And it's no trivial matter. So regardless of Moses' guilt, God's compassion, however, cannot let Moses die without seeing this promise of the future. And that leads to a second critical point of the importance of Pisgah in its location, not geographically, but its location in the text. Deuteronomy 34 is not only the final chapter of the life of Moses, or the book of Deuteronomy, it is the final chapter of the Torah. And Christian people never forget the Torah is the equivalent for Jews what Jesus is for us. It's the way they know the Word of God, the revelation of God. So when we come to the conclusion then of the Torah, what do we find here? Not a cemetery, not a shrine to a past, but a look to the future. This view of the promised land, and also symbolized in the transfer from Moses to Joshua, who would lead them into that land. And the importance of that vision to Jewish identity continues to this day, 4,000 years later. And without it, the reestablishment of Israel as a modern nation in 1948 would not even be conceivable. And that modern Israel, at least some in Israel, still make that claim of the entire land west of the Jordan based on this vision, ignoring the claims and the aspirations of the Palestinian people that is so highly problematic for so many reasons. But even that a case for legitimacy of that claim can be made today gives witness to the power and the scope of that vision. Raises a whole nother topic we're not going to go into this morning. But this is then not a typical obituary. But still, why should it matter to us, those of us who are not among the Hebrew tribes? God takes Moses up to the mountain to show him this beautiful view and then pulls the plug, right? Well, goody for Moses. He gets to see it. Now, on the one hand, it tells us something about God and God's compassion, that God could not let Moses die without at least seeing that promised land with his own eyes. And that alone makes it a story worthwhile to remember. And on the other hand, it tells us something also about Moses, this incredible human being who changed the course not only of his people, but the course of history with a vision of a people freed from their bondage of slavery, given their own land. And that also makes it a story worthwhile for us. But why is this conclusion to the Torah significant for us as followers of Jesus? So fast forward to the end of the New Testament and recall that beautiful vision of the New Jerusalem, where tears and even death will be no more. Stephen Covey gives as one of his 7 habits of highly effective people to begin with the end in mind. Good coaches teach their athletes before they take that shot, before they throw that pass, before they attempt that leap over that high bar, to envision it in their heads, to see themselves completing that goal, to begin with that end in mind. So what is our vision for where we are headed? You see, this story is not about Moses. It's not about Pisgah. It's about being at the mountaintop, about having that kind of vision, of seeing the possibilities that God gives to us for our lives, for our church, for our nation, for our world. So I ask again, have you ever been to Pisgah? Have you been given a glimpse of that vision? The best example, I think, of this is, of course, Martin Luther King Jr., because he was one who was there. And you may remember that conclusion to the speech that he gave on the last night of his life, there at the Church of God in Christ Temple in Memphis, Tennessee, when he spoke of being on that mountaintop and seeing that vision. Earlier in the speech, he said that if he stood at the beginning of time and had been given a choice by God to choose the period of history in which he would live, he said he would tell God this: if you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy. And then he goes on to explain why. Now, that's a strange statement to make, because the world is all messed up. The nation is sick. Trouble is in the land. Confusion all around. That's a strange statement. But I know somehow that only when it's dark enough can you see the stars. And I see God working in this period of the 20th century in a way that people in some strange way are responding. Something is happening in our world. The masses of people are rising up, and wherever they are assembled today, whether they are in Johannesburg, South Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, New York City, Atlanta, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi, or Memphis, Tennessee, the cry is always the same: we want to be free. To have that vision, right, that motivates you. King went on to speak of the basic freedoms they were fighting for and why he was in Memphis and why they gathered that night and what they would achieve together that was so much bigger than winning a few points in a labor dispute between the sanitation workers and the city of Memphis. So much bigger than the people gathered in the church that night. So much bigger than one city in the United States. So much bigger even than that moment in history, because it was about the promised land of which God had given him a glimpse. And so he concluded that night with this:
well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
It amazes me to this day, the vision of that man. Have you been to that place? Have you seen that land? The land where, as Martin Luther King said on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial just a few years earlier, where little black children and little white children will walk hand in hand in peace. Have you seen that land? A land where people of color are not subjected to racial profiling or jokes about being descendants of apes. Have you seen that land? The land where every child, regardless of race, religion, immigration status, or gender identity, is treated as a child of God. Have you seen that land? The land where sexual orientation is seen as a gift of private blessing given by God to each individual, unique and beautiful, rather than a matter of public discourse, exploitation, and ridicule. Have you seen that land? The land where the poor are blessed rather than cursed and the hungry are fed rather than shunned. Have you seen that land? The land where prisons are places of rehabilitation rather than retribution. Have you seen that land? The land where schools are fully funded and politicians sell cookies and wrapping papers to fund their campaign. Have you seen that land? The land where nuclear disarmament will be done on earth, not only in North Korea, but also in the United States. Have you seen that land? The land where God's people are united by their common humanity rather than divided by their differences. Have you seen that land? The land where relationships are more prized than possessions, and possessions come after relationships. Have you seen that land? That land where every child is loved and no child is abused. Have you seen that land? The land not just of milk and honey, a land free of hate and full of justice. Have you seen that land? The land where farm workers have the same rights as college professors, where foreign residents have the same respect as bank presidents, where destitutes don't have to prostitute to survive, a land of peace and justice promised for all people. Have you seen that land? Moses saw that land. Martin Luther King Jr. saw that land. Elijah Bristow saw that land just outside these doors. Can you? May we see that land, be guided by that vision until it comes to pass. This is the promise, the vision that we have been given to share with the world, to share that light, to speak of that love and peace, to unite all people together around such a vision where everyone is treated as a child of God, where all are respected and honored, where everyone is fed and sheltered. We invite all to be a part, to join with us, to find that place where you can be a part of that mission. Connect with me or April so we can help you to connect in the mission that God has given to us to be that light to the world here in the heart of Eugene. And for all those who are able, I invite to stand with us to sing our next song, To Fill the World with Love.